de luchtvaart. Ook na de vlucht van de Apollo 17, die de laatste landing op de maan maakte, ontwikkelde de lucht- en ruimtevaart zich verder.
With the resounding success of the Apollo lunar missions, the dreamers of our world were reminded once again that space was not only man's future, it was his destiny.
For a long time, men thought the heavens were something held up by a turtle. We all lived in the back of a giant turtle, and the sky, the firmament, was where the gods lived. But when man first began to realize the earth was a sphere, it was a ball, it was round, it was obvious something was keeping us from falling off, whether we understood gravity or not. That's what man began to learn. That meant there was some place to go. And anytime man, or anytime the human race has found that there's somewhere to go, they've tried to go there.
It was hard to believe that 12 men had walked on the surface of Earth's nearest neighbor, just slightly more than a decade after Yuri Gagarin lifted up into space to become the first man ever to circle our world in a space capsule. Since that historic day, President Kennedy promised the world that the United States would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. The Mercury missions carried 6 men into space aboard Redstone and Atlas rockets.
Roger, 7. You have a go. At least 7 orbits. Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around. Oh, that view is tremendous.
Project Gemini gave the Americans their first walk in space when Ed White floated above the Earth for 22 minutes while tethered to his Gemini 4 spacecraft.
Your right front edge looks beautiful. I feel like $1 million. I'm going to pick up. Y'all left. Coming back to you.
Then came Apollo and the final steps to the moon.
30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
12 men walked on the surface of the moon. These were watershed moments in the history of man.
We hope that this will be a symbol of what our feelings are, what the feelings of the Apollo program are, and a symbol of mankind that we can live in peace and harmony in the future. 3, 2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector good.
Even though the Apollo lunar landings were over, mankind's quest into space was destined to continue. First, there was Skylab, that thrilling harbinger of things to come, living and working in space. Launched in the spring of 1973, the Skylab spacecraft was as large as an average 3-bedroom house. The first crew spent nearly a month on board. The second orbited the Earth for 59 days, while the third crew spent 84 days in space. Among other research, each crew gathered data on the Earth's environment and conducted experiments on the effects of prolonged weightlessness on the human body.
As far as the body is concerned, after it has been weightless for a prolonged period, there's less demand in the weightless state. So when you get back here on the surface of the Earth, then that cardiovascular system has to work. It has to return blood back from your legs back to your head. That's an adaptive process, so it's adaptive to that weightless environment. So I think that we're going to find that the body can do fine for those long periods and then we have to give them enough protective mechanisms and pre-reentry procedures that will help them then to be fine faster when they come back to Earth.
Skylab, I believe, was, to me, possibly the most important of the programs that we had. This was the first one where we went directly after payback for the American people and for our investors in the American people. We conducted major science associated with life science, earth resources, astronomy, and what we call a series of corollary experiments, basically manufacturing space type experiments. This is one of my favorite programs because we had the world's first space station.
Not all of the experiments conducted in space after Apollo 17 were scientific. In the summer of 1975, the United States launched the Apollo-Soyuz mission, what some have called the handshake in space. As part of this historic mission, Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts met in space for the first ever international rendezvous and docking of their two spacecraft.
As commander of the Apollo-Soyuz mission, which was the last Apollo we had and the only international rendezvous and docking mission, it really had two factors. Yes, there was a geopolitical factor that showed that the two countries could work together. In fact, it was, often people say it was a height of détente. When about 150 miles up, I opened the hatch and shook hands with my good friend Alexei Leonov. But it showed that here we had two major powers, the two superpowers in the world. We had different languages, certainly different political systems, and even different units of measurements. But if you could set a common goal, you could come together and work for it and put differences aside. And Apollo-Soyuz was certainly the real height of that type of goal. And it did really set the groundwork to how we'd work for future cooperation in space.
Well, the Apollo-Soyuz was an interesting flight from purely a human factors point of view. We decided early on that we would speak Russian and the Russians would speak English. We figured there was less chance of making mistakes that way. But we had a lot of fun. We enjoyed working with the Russians, and there were a number of challenges with interfaces. They were not used to an open type society and passing on information that we thought we needed to fly the mission successfully. And we had some pretty healthy disagreements there till we got the ground rules set, but once we did, we always got along well with the cosmonauts. That was never an issue. We made some good friends over there and still have them.
The best part of a good dinner is not what you eat, but with whom you eat.
On April 12, 1981, 20 years to the day after Yuri Gagarin's first orbital flight, the countdown for America's first space shuttle, Columbia, began.
15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. We have a go for main engine start. 6, 5. We have main engine start. 3, 2, 1, 0. We have solid rocket booster ignition and liftoff. The shuttle has cleared the tower.
With 7.5 million pounds of thrust, naval aviators John Young and Robert Crippen rose thundering into the sky aboard mankind's newest flying machine. After reaching an altitude of 63 miles above the Earth, Columbia entered a low Earth orbit. Then, after reaching Mach 25 speed, Young and Crippen maneuvered their spacecraft into a 130-mile-high orbit and began the first of their 36 trips around the globe. With new speed and altitude records for winged aircraft being set during Columbia's maiden voyage, the words of people like Chuck Yeager, Pete Knight, and Scott Crossfield could be heard echoing across the dry lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base, which was to be the landing site for Columbia's first adventure into space.
When we got our hands on the X-1, that opened up space to us.
We could have ridden into space on wings as opposed to a ballistic reentry or a capsule approach.
The fact of the matter is that we proposed an orbital version of the X-15 in 1958.
But the shuttle, in fact, was an aerospace plane. This had always been the dream of many of the pioneers of astronautics, that you would, in fact, fly into space in some kind of a device and return from space. in that same device. And it's basically an aircraft. It comes back, flies back, and lands at Edwards or at Cape Canaveral.
Some 150 plus astronauts from all around the world have flown into space as a part of these explorations into the unknown. It was an experience that none of them will ever forget.
The beginning is unbelievable. It's probably the most thrilling thing that a person could do, not because it's violent or anything else, but because it's so different. All the extreme vibration that you experience for the first 2 minutes, and then instant quiet and smooth when the solid rockets separate and you're just accelerating on the main engines.
Being in space is just a spectacular experience. I'm not sure there are good words to describe it. It's not just the physical sensation of being weightless. That in itself is amazing, but virtually every sight around you is something awe-inspiring. And in the back of my mind, at any rate, there's always this remembrance that it's something between highly remarkable and absolutely incredible that I and a team of my friends and colleagues have created a vehicle and a program and a knowledge base and a real capability to put people, me, into orbit and bring me home with a decently high level of confidence. Once you're there, it feels just sort of serenely natural to be there. But you think back through all the details and preparation and energy, sheer power it took to get you there. And it's just astounding that us little two-footed critters have the capability to control such energy and direct it in those paths.
To me personally, the experience of going into space was a very powerful one emotionally, psychologically. Seeing the grandeur of terrestrial creation from a vantage point that very few yet today have an opportunity to stand on and see, to gaze along the horizon of the Earth, the limb of the Earth, out into the depths of space. Those kinds of experiences leave a lasting impression. And to me, they both humbled and inspired me to other thoughts, to thinking of creation and a creator in ways that I hadn't thought of those things before. It's a very powerful experience.
Spacewalks were to become a regular part of the shuttle missions. But for the astronauts, each adventure out beyond the confines of their spacecraft was a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Space shuttle spacewalk that was a high point, and at that point I said, that's it. Well, everything came together. It was just a bolt of lightning. I had a clock in my head that went off periodically. Look around. And I may not move my body any, but I look around. Where are we over the Earth? What are the sights? You know, you're looking at the pyramids in Australia. What are you doing? Great Barrier Reef, you know, what is the beauty? And look around and see if you can see any planets out there. It doesn't take a moment. It doesn't interfere with the work, but look around.
EVA for mission specialists is one of the most coveted experiences. It would be wonderful to have a couple hours out in a spacesuit just hanging off the rail of the spaceship, looking down without a frame around your window at all and seeing the world slide by your feet. I had a few moments of that on our spacewalk, but not any extended period of time. Before you know it, it's over and you're back in the airlock.
The most exciting and what seemed to be the most daring step into space took place when Challenger astronauts McCandles and Stewart tested the new manned maneuvering unit that let them travel untethered just under 100 meters from the orbiting space shuttle.
Bruce McCandless preparing to make his 150-foot sojourn, moving away from the orbiter out to a distance of 150 feet and then returning. And then following that, about 10 minutes later, he will go out to a distance of 300 feet.
Well, that may have been one small step for Neil, but it's a heck of a big leap for me.
Roger, copy that, Bruce.
Okay, Bruce, we see your report.
The view is simply spectacular and panoramic, and we believe that attached. We're literally opening a new frontier in what man can do in space, and we'll be paving the way for many important operations on the coming space stations.
The Space Shuttle missions have not only taken the dream of flight another step into the future, they have also proven to be of tremendous value and importance to mankind. Communication satellites have been launched for both governments and private industry. Unmanned interplanetary exploration spacecraft, like Galileo and Magellan, have been released by the shuttle to send back pictures and other data from distant neighbors Jupiter and Venus. Invaluable scientific research has been conducted that has proven to have significant implications and benefits to all of humanity.
And the more we learn about ourselves and space and the effects of microgravity or zero-G, the better handle we have on a lot of things. New medicines that could be made in space that will have a purity better than anything we can make here on Earth. And so the purity then means you can perhaps tailor medicines and drugs to specific purposes, very specific purposes for a certain disease or cancer, AIDS, who knows what comes out of this.
Medicine has tremendously changed since we did our initial space flights. We didn't start space exploration in order to develop particularly medical benefits, but because human beings were going into space, we had to find out what was happening to human beings. Now, that requires to develop a lot of things that you and every individual on the surface of the Earth today has benefit of. Every emergency room, every intensive care unit, coronary care unit, etc. today has that equipment because of what we did.
There's still going to be a lot of great things to be done in space. And we're getting more and more commercialization. In fact, we couldn't, most of it's unmanned, but we couldn't live without space now, you know, for satellite links, for both communications, for data flow, for television. Where would it be without space?
The Space Shuttle missions have given both the astronauts and those of us here on Earth a new and powerful perspective of our fragile home planet.
When you see the planet Earth from space, it is also very clear that it is a living place. And there is no other place that we yet know of like it. So the bottom line here is we have to take care of this place. And there are ways to take care of it that mean we have to work together as a planet. We have to work together as the crew of Spaceship Earth.
As I'll take my very first look at the Earth from space and realize the oneness of Earth, realize the wholeness of Earth as one community. And that is by itself, in my mind, a very important reason why space exploration should continue.
But there has also been tragedy. On January 28, 1986, Challenger was being prepared for her 10th liftoff into space. The 7-person crew included Krista McCollum, who had been designated America's teacher in space. 73 seconds after Challenger had risen up from the launch pad at Cape Canaveral, the rocket exploded and all crew members were lost. Once more, a group of special men and women who had been bold enough to follow their dreams would never again be able to soar high into the unknown heavens.
When the Challenger accident happened, many, many more people mourned for those astronauts than any of us in the program could have imagined. We all felt a personal loss. We knew the astronauts. But as a country and as a world, I think people really came together behind that.
It would be almost 3 years before another shuttle mission would lift off. 3 years of redesigning the rocket boosters and adding new safety precautions. 3 years to rebuild the optimism and confidence within the space program. In April of 1990, this rediscovered sense of optimism faced another major disappointment. After a successful launch, the shuttle Discovery released the first of NASA's great observatories in space. The prospects of what would be learned from the Hubble Space Telescope had the scientific community almost giddy with anticipation. Scientists were predicting that Hubble's enormous eyes would be able to see 97% of the known universe. It would be capable of detecting objects 50 times fainter than those seen by existing earthbound telescopes. Not since Galileo would such a profound advance be made in our ability to perceive the outer limits of the universe. Once again, science fiction was about to become science fact. But then the unthinkable happened. After the equipment was deployed and tested, it was discovered that images being received back on Earth were blurry. It would be 3 long years until a shuttle crew led by veteran astronaut Story Musgrave would return to space to repair the damaged space telescope.
I worked it out for each size of the person in there, and it's choreographed. It's just like a ballet, where every single finger and every toe, you know where it is and where it's going to go next. You know, in space, I haven't been here 27 years. You look for grand moments. That was as grand a moment for me as even some of my flights in space.
We find out so much about our place in the universe from things like the Hubble Space Telescope. What is it worth to us to find out how old is the universe? How large is the universe? You know, these are things that people have asked themselves since the beginning of humankind.
Once again, it seemed that yesterday's dreams had become today's reality. Man was now able to look into worlds that only a few short years before could only be seen in the minds and imaginations of the dreamers. With each passing day, we were learning more and more about the unexplored mysteries that lay hidden deep within the night sky. But the question that remains is, where should we go next? How should we direct our future efforts in space if we are to take the dream of flight another step toward the unknown?
I've been an advocate for a lunar base for the last 10 years or so because I feel like it's the natural evolution of human exploration of space.
I would say in the near foreseeable future, we have to talk about a space station, and then we have to learn from that and see if we can go much farther than that.
I think for the immediate future, man's destiny in space is Mars. It's the nearest body of any real significance that we haven't visited, that we really have a capability of traveling to.
If you write me a blank check, I want to go to Alpha Centauri. And most people say, well, I want to go to Mars. Well, I think that's a stepping stone to another place. I'd rather go to Alpha Centauri myself.
I think the ultimate goal of space exploration is space colonization. What we really want to do as a civilization is expand into the universe.